way to the public session, we just have Victor Brzezinski, who's going to join us tomorrow. He's done some work on our own board assessment and processes. So he's just going to sit there in the observer seat for now. Victor will give you coffee and something else soon. Apologies. Okay, I think we're ready to rock and roll. Everybody, before we start, give me 1 minute. Just waiting for Martin and James to sit. Victor, if you're desperate for coffee, there is a coffee machine outside. You're welcome to pop out if you want to. Okay, Martin, are you ready for me? Okay.
Can you hear that Victor was saying?
We'll say it after, not in the public session. Okay, I think we can start the public session. Everybody comfortable? Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Gabriela and James for the IESBA session. And we also have Tom here for the joint session afterwards, and then a session with the IESBA. So Gabriela, as always, we spent time yesterday to work through the papers that we have from our side and to prepare. Thank you for your report and thank you for your slides. What I would like to do, as always, is hand over to you, and maybe we can get the people to just load your slides for you, and let's talk to that. I'm going to ask the board members to pause their comments until you're finished, or if you have sort of, I would say let's go through everything you have to say, and then I'll share some of the thoughts that we pulled together out of our private discussion yesterday in preparing for the session, and then we open it up for discussion. So thank you, and over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda, and good morning to all of you. Thank you very much again for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to this good conversation with the PIOB. Good morning also to Ken, for whom it's a very early morning. I think it's 4 a.m. in New York. And thank you for joining. And to Robert, of course, for whom it's a very late evening or night, I don't know. So thank you very much. I'll try to be quick. I think that we have 15 minutes for this session, right, Linda? I will go.
Yes, I would say it would be really good if you maybe go through your slides in 10, 15 minutes, and then we rather have more time for the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to do it. I don't know if we have the slides on the screen. But as we wait, so the agenda for this meeting, should it be me moving the slides, or sorry, can I ask to move the slides, or should I move? Thank you, Martin. So the agenda for today is quite simple. I just want to thank you very much, Martin. I just want to give you, to give the PIOB a very brief sight of the discussions that we have been having internally on how to position the IESBA in a very specific context and circumstance, and then give you a brief update of the ongoing work of the IESBA on the different projects, namely on from culture and governance, CIVs, private equity, and sustainability. So this is our short agenda for today. So we took the first, as I mentioned in my report to the PIOB, we took the first 2 or 3 months of the year to pause a little bit and reflect on ourselves as a standard-setting board. And this comes at a time where we finalized the sustainability standards project, which kept us very busy, as you know, over the last 2 years. So this was really time to take a deep breath and think about what's next, even if we have a plan, of course, but also to look, and mainly to look around and think about the contextual influences that we need to be attentive to, namely this context of, geopolitical tension, political changes, the trends of deregulation versus simplification, which is creating having some impacts on trust, generally, not on the IESBA, but generally. This focus on competitiveness focus, and we are not positioning ourselves politically or whatever, but we need to understand what's happening and to see what we as an ethics and independent standards board, have to provide and should provide and be doing in this context. And of course, the matter of trust is critical, is key for us. This is ultimately what we do, is to try to provide materials, standards that help creating trust and reinforcing trust, not only in the profession and in financial and non-financial information, but more generally in business, economies, and etc. So we see here, of course, some challenges as everyone in this context, but also some opportunities for the IESBA. And if anything, the IESBA standards and maybe specifically the sustainability standards, they can really be helpful as we see them to help fostering consistency in a context where there is a lot of fragmentation, different trends, uncertainty, and etc. They can act as an anchor for stability because ethics is more resilient to these changes, to these political tensions, and etc. Ethics is essential. Then what we do with ethics, translating them into principles, it's the big mission of this board. But we really think that in this context of uncertainty, the context of change, and etc., if anything, ethics becomes even more important. Even if, and also if you think about this deregulation trend, where we foreseeably will have less rules, less detailed rules, and consequently a different kind of supervision, the ethics baseline, the ethics codes, the ethics standards become even more important to provide a stable baseline of principles, provisions, and etc. that may guide professionals doing their job in this context. So the board has been reflecting on all this, and we have clear that this is a time for us to consolidate the many standards advanced over the last, say, 5 years through a strong focus on adoption and implementation. You know that we created a specific working group for that purpose, and it's really time to make the best out of the code and of the very rich standards, ethics and independent standards in the code, and make sure that with our help, the users will be able, the profession regulators, and etc., will be able to adopt them and implement them properly. So this focus on adoption and implementation, it's not only a strategic positioning from the board to reinforce its offer, its work in that respect, but also a matter of consolidating the standards. This, of course, will go hand in hand with a slowdown of the standard setting intensity, as you are seeing from our work plan. We think that the profession, the users, the environment need this, not a full pause, because there are still a few things that we need to do, namely to address emerging topics, but it is a deliberate decision to slow down the pace of standard setting and increase stakeholder dialogue, which is part of our adoption and implementation project. So with this, if the slide changes, which is not the case, can I ask for your help with this? I will go quickly through the different projects and areas where the IESBA is doing work. Consistent with this approach, everything that we are doing now has this context in mind. And the first of one about which I'd like to say something is on firm culture and governance. And I'll keep on speaking if you don't mind, even without the slides, or?
Rathia is trying to sort it. I don't know why it's not the button. It worked perfectly yesterday. Oh, there we go. Okay.
So should I wait, right? Oh, okay, it's already there. I'm sorry. So farm culture and governance is one of the big or the most relevant areas where we have been working intensively, not only over the last year, where we have been doing a lot of research, fact-finding, etc. The PIOB is completely aware of the work and of the conclusions, and etc. In December, we approved the report. The board approved the staff report, and the decision was to develop to form two working groups, one on standard setting, the other on non-authoritative material, which is a word that I don't like, but it's how everyone recognizes it. Maybe we should name it differently. So, and the reasons for this project, they have been extensively shared with this group and discussed in detail from many perspectives. But it's really about trying to provide the firms with materials which will only help them become more ethical and avoid a few problems and add to their value proposition. This is a constructive, collaborative approach that we are taking. I will not forget what Dave Sullivan once said here about try to put it in a positive, constructive way. That's exactly what we have been doing. This outreach that we have been doing clearly shows that there are good examples already. We are very happy to see that some firms are making developments and taking decisions already responding to the report without waiting for standards or whatever, which is very significant from demonstrating the importance that this has, and that the firms, or a part of them at least, are understanding the value of what we are doing. The idea and the journey and the road is really to identify these good examples, these good practices, these good approaches to firm culture and governance, and try to elevate these individual examples into principles that may apply to, I'm not going to say all the firms, because this is going to be proportionate and scalable, but to many more firms than just individual examples that we are seeing. So this is about trying to avoid some consequences that we know result from some ethical lapses, and that individual ethical lapses most of the time result from fragile or weak firm culture and governance. We are all the product of what's around us, be it in a family, in a profession, in a group, in a company, in a board or whatever. And this is the reality also for the firms. This is well established in the sociology, organizational psychology, and etc., that the culture and the governance determines sometimes the individual behavior. So this is really about trying to provide something that helps the firms creating the right environment, institutional, organizational environment, to uphold and elevate ethical individual behaviors throughout the firm. So the objective, I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but there were some questions, and there are still some questions about how this connects with ISQM1 on IESBA side. There were some concerns that we might be overlapping, duplicating, making it reopen, and etc. It's not the case, and we are addressing this topic, on a day-by-day basis, very carefully, speaking with IESBA staff, with Tom, and etc. This is about a different thing. This is not, the objective is not the same. The objective is not overlapping. The objective is not duplicating. It's about a different thing. It's about developing a culture and a governance framework which may reinforce the high standard of ethical behavior within the firm. So if anything, what I can ensure to the PIOB is that this is well on our radar, and that we are addressing this very carefully to make sure that, first, there will be no duplications. Secondly, that this will not, as some stakeholders are afraid of, this will not force reopening ISQM1. We know that the profession is having a hard time in implementing ISQM1. It's a very important standard, and it's not our purpose, and it's not our objective, and it's not what we are going to do, something that impacts ISQM1 and forces reopening it. This is about a completely different thing. ISQM1 has a risk-based approach to design the components of a system of quality. This is not about the same thing. It's a principles, or as we see it, a principles-based framework across some dimensions. Of course, there are some areas of intersection, I would say, but this happens with everything that we both do. It's not the first time. So, of course, it's important that we are aware of this, and that we are listening very well to our stakeholders to be careful in this respect. But I think that there is no risk that any problem will arise. Some aspects of ISQM1 are relevant, but the firm culture and governance is not extension or duplication of ISQM1. So the decision was to form these two groups, one on standard setting, principles-based, scalable, proportional, in close coordination with IESB. One thing that is clear to us is that there will be no one-size-fits-all approach. We will not set standards which work the same way for all the farms. It is possible that some of them will just be left out, at least from some of the parts of it, as we reflect upon how burdensome and how useful, this connection, this interaction between, cost and benefit and etc. So there will be no one size fits all. This is not going to be probably a standard for all the firms, but we will need to calibrate it properly and design and set the line where it should be set. And then non-authoritative material, on which we are putting a lot of our cards. This is going to be really important because this is about creating awareness. This is about bringing other stakeholders in the loop and calling for their responsibilities and for them to position themselves as they should in terms of contributing to create proper, strong ethical culture and governance at the firm's level. Not everything can be done by the IESBA at all. We are just trying to provide part of what is necessary in that respect. Another area where we have been working, and the PIOB has been following this very carefully from the start, as it resulted from a proposal a long time ago and a request from the PIOB. It's not that we don't see need and importance in this project. We do, but this is very familiar to you. And this is about the CIVs and pension funds, which was long ago decided to be left out of the PI definition for reasons which are the PIOBs and everyone is aware. But there is something that the PIOB requested, which was to see if the code was still fit for purpose to address some independence concerns within the firms and pension funds and CIVs. This is what we are doing, namely addressing this issue about if the code's related entity definition is fit to absorb all the third parties or whatever with whom CIVs and pension funds relate in terms of ensuring their full independence. These entities, CIVs and pension funds, have a different structure. They relate with different third parties and corporations. So we need to see if all these third parties which may influence or affect the result of the audit are enough covered by the existing definition of related entity, or if we need to do something, be it tweak the standard or do some guidance or whatever. We just launched a consultation paper, and this shows the level of care and thoughtfulness that we are putting into this topic, because we really need to have all this information. This topic sits at the intersection of securities frameworks and audit framework. Of course, we are seeing it from the perspective of the audit independence, not the perspective of the CIVs, but we need to know everything. So this consultation paper really aims at bringing the information that we need to proceed with the job. Private equity investments in accounting firms, a burning topic, about which everyone wants to speak everywhere we go. There are questions about why aren't we including this in the firm culture and governance project. Everywhere the question comes, and it's probably conceptually a fair question. As I explained before, these are issues at different level of maturity. It would be very risky to include this in the firm culture and governance project, even if we admit that one day in the future they may, not merge, but meet or whatever. What we are doing now is trying to clearly understand the risks and opportunities of this phenomena. We have a list that I presented to the PI in the last board meeting about the list of opportunities and risks that we have already identified. From the IESBA perspective, what matters is if there are some increased risks in terms of ethics and independence. And that's what we are doing, identifying these possible increased risks resulting from this private equity investment. You have some of them there: firm culture, pressure, conflicts of interest, confidentiality. These are some of the risks that we have seen. And there will be a staff alert that we will be soon publishing identifying these risks or alerting for these risks and directing stakeholders to the code and to the solutions and responses that the code already includes to these topics. Then in the future, we may or not be doing something else, but for the time being, we think it's very useful that the firms will have this kind of guidance about which are the risks that they should be attentive to, and look at the code to get the responses, the support, and etc. that already sits in the code for these questions. And finally, and this is going to be my last slide, sustainability, nothing new for this board. We did a joint launch as very much requested and asked by PIOB among others, and it was the right thing to do given that this is a package. This was in late January, and what we are doing now is adoption and implementation, adoption and implementation, adoption and implementation. We both created specific groups, let's call it like them, but IMAG, it's the group that we are creating to respond to a request also from the PIOB, or initially from the PIOB, to create some kind of platform to monitor the implementation of the sustainability standard of the IESA. That's being done. We already have a chair. I'm not going to reveal it because it's not yet public, but it's a board member from the firms, by the way, because we need people who are very much involved in the work. And this group is going to be composed by practitioners working on IESA implementation, so that they can be, in the forefront of the understanding of any possible issues, difficulties, obstacles that we can help with. We will also have an online platform for direct communication with stakeholders who may want to bring us some concerns in that respect. Just as a note, the IESA was already adopted in Australia 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, I don't remember. Through the IESB, through the IESB, but then they are consulting, which points directly to the IESA, so applies to the IESA directly, but they are still consulting to include it in the law. And I'm going to stop here, Linda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, for that, and thank you for your report as well. We will, in the joint session, talk a little bit more about just what are you seeing through your 5,000 or sustainability between the two boards, adoption and implementation plan, and so on. So we'll park that one for now. We said for purposes of your session, we really want to focus on firm culture and governance, but there might be 1 or 2 other comments that come out. I'm going to attempt to just maybe at a high level summarize the comments that came out of our preparation session, but as always, I stand to be corrected or supplemented by board members. I'm sure they'll have lots of interesting questions for you. So maybe just a couple of things, Gabriela, and this is a really important topic, and we agree and we recognize it. For now, I'm just going to park a little bit the coordination or the link to ISQM1, because we might pick that up in that session as well, depending on whether we've got time, but maybe just leaving that aside for a moment. What we still battle with, and we really think it's an important topic and we see the need for it, but we battle with understanding. I'm sure you have it very clear in your minds as a board, but we battle to understand the problem statement. What is it that we want to solve? And you made the comment about, this is trying to help the firms to be more ethical, and we get that. But I think for purposes of people out there that's ultimately going to comment on your exposure draft, and very importantly going to have to implement this, it should be quite clear, the why and the what. So we thought about it in our discussions, and if we think about what you're trying and sort of to move towards, which are important, and that is to give stronger ethical governance, guidance, structures, etc., at the firm level. So it seems like it's all around the scoping. It seems like the scoping is really to come up at a firm level with, and at firm level, we don't just talk about the audit side. It seems as if it's also the other service lines, which is obviously very important, to come up with what are important principles, and you've made that comment often about it's a principle-based, it will be principle-based standard. What are the important principles that the firm need to consider in its design? And secondly, what are the important principles, and that might flow into policies, practices, etc., that the firm needs to concentrate on and put into place to manage, govern ethical behavior of its people. And the third one is potentially, and also what's the overlay of transparency that the firm also needs to put out so that they can demonstrate that there's good governance, that there's ethics, ethical behavior, and that they have a governance structure to govern ethics. And it goes back to those principles of independence, managing conflict of interest, quality, and transparency, which is in any event in the code. We do think that there's a risk on the quality and audit quality side that it can get its tentacles into ISQM1, and therefore it's really important to understand, you know, how we're comfortable and how do you make sure between the two boards that there's not an overlap when it comes to quality, because ultimately ISQM1 goes into policies, processes, structures that also govern independence and things like that. So that's something that's sort of maybe the second point. Other than not fully understanding the scope and the problem statement, we're not fully understanding why we're saying that this is not in the space of ISQM1. The other discussion that we had is when it comes to the design of the, you know, how must the firm be designed and what policy structures and so on do it need to have in place to be also seen to be an ethical organization. It sounds like some of that might be setting corporate governance principles for firms, and maybe it is that. You know, if you start talking about the firm, the composition of the board and non-executive directors and so on. So maybe it is setting governance principles, but it's just being very clear on that and the link between setting good corporate governance principles and ethics, you know, because this is an ethics code. It's not a corporate governance code, but I just think that's something that's necessary to articulate very well. It's part of the conversation we had. You spoke about tone at the top before. All of those things are very important principles that we think lead into that behavior, how people behave and so on. We agree with the comments that you and your board have made that it must be principle based, but it can't just be principle based. Obviously, it probably needs those examples and practical practices that potentially need to be put in place to get you to best practice behavior. That one or two other things that we battled with a little bit is scalability, because if these will be rules for or principles or standards for firms, how do you decide which firms are in and which firms are out? It's very different if it's at an engagement level, because you can say if this is a public interest audit or a listed company audit or whatever, then auditors have to comply with these rules, like the non-audit services rules and so on. But it's very different if you know, a firm either has it or hasn't, and what if the firm then is doing a small subsidiary audit in a group? So just, I think it's important to understand what those scalability rules will be. And let me just see, I think there was one more comment that I wanted to make. Oh, and this is actually a quite important one. And we see a lot of the questions about the code and the value of the code and the implementability of the code. I'm not sure if that's a real word, but anyway, it is important also for firms to see the value. Now, I come from a corporate governance background, so I believe good governance add value to an organization. But it is important that the firms that will be subject to these requirements must also understand and see the clarity and see the value proposition. So those were some of the key points that we've made. I'm going to just check if I've got any additions for now from the board, and then I'm going to go back to you. Everybody happy if I just circle back? Dave wants to say something.
and maybe this is just a point of clarification, and Gabriela, I think I know the answer to this, but it sounds like what the board is working toward is both standard setting and some sort of practice aids, NAM, whatever you want to call it. I guess the one of the questions would be, could there be a scenario where as you go through this, maybe standard setting isn't part of this, but practice aids and amplifying best practices would be enough. I don't know the answer to that, but I just asked the question.
So thank you very much, Linda and Dave and PIOB for the comments. This is really important to discuss here and to try to bring some clarity, the possible clarity, given the stage of the process where we are. Anyway, stating the problem, Linda, I tried, but for us, it's very clear in our mind, and the problem that we are wanting to address is the following. The IESBA has been working for a long time setting standards to address individual behavior, individual ethical lapses within the firms by accountants and etc. This is the focus. This has been the focus of the code. The code vaguely refers to culture and governance at some point, or culture of the firm, but it's a very, very, very minor and basic touch on that topic. As we considered our strategy and work plan, it was brought to our attention that if you're doing that such great work, and it's not only you, it's regulators, it's PAOs, it's the profession, etc., but it still exists, and sometimes exists in a way that it does not affect one person in the firm. It's a collective problem. Think about the ethical, the cheating on exams. It's not one individual behavior. It's a pervasive within the firm, and the problem seems to be even more relevant that we know. Anyway, just an example. So if this happens, it's because probably there is something in the firm's organization, way structuring, culture and governance that provides room for these ethical lapses to happen. And that's what we want to address. And that's why the result that we see, the objective, the public interest objective that we are trying to achieve is that with some additional instruments, some additional tools, some additional materials, the firms can become more robust in terms of creating incentives for good practices and avoiding some ethical lapses within the firm. So this is ultimately about ethics. Linda, you said maybe you are trying to set up corporate governance or governance principles for firms. I mean, we can use the words as we want, but ultimately this is about ethics. And the two things are very well connected, as you know. If you look at the OECD principles, they include references to ethics. You go through the OECD principles and ethics is there, and the need to adopt ethics standards. So the connection between the two, it's obvious because governance, it's part of what drives ethics and ethical behavior. So our purpose and objective is not an objective per se in itself of setting governance standards to set governance standards. It's really ultimately to achieve a public interest objective, which is to elevate the ethical behavior of accountants within the firms. Now, moving a little bit forward, and this is for the whole firm, as you said, Linda, this is not only for auditors, it's for all lines of service within the firm, because we know that sometimes the problems also happen in these interlinks and interconnections between consulting, tax, audit, and etc. So the same structures should be, or the same governance and the same principles should be in place for all of those within the firm, because it's the firm that drives then the individual behavior. With respect to the concrete topics, I mean, independence, transparency, rewards, incentives, ethical leadership, and etc., we will see how each one can be addressed in terms of making the right, producing the right principle. But to the question about how are we going to decide what's going to go into the standards and it's going to go into the NAM, and how are we going to put in place this scalability approach? I don't have an answer yet, and it would be very dangerous if I would have an answer now, because as you know, we are now running, organizing global roundtables. We had already one in New York, one in Brussels, one in Melbourne, one with the Forum of Firms. We had a deep dive with the Forum of Firms, 4 or 5 years of discussion with the Forum of Firms. 2 virtual roundtables, one for Africa, one for Latin America. So this is the time of collecting information. It's not that we don't know where we are going, but it would be dangerous to say this is going to be the dividing line. Is it a challenge? Yes, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge, and the criteria will always be the benefit that we see coming from the scoping in some firms, in some principles, and the burden or the less relevant public interest impact. I give you an example, and I'm not saying that this is going to be this, but for instance, independence. It's not the same if we are speaking about a big 4 firm or a 2 partners firm somewhere, because independence does not mean the same. And we are not even saying that we are going to say, or that you have to have independence this way with a director and etc. Even the way that the principles will be applied, there should be a lot of room, and that's why this is going to be principles based for the firms which are going to be scoped in, probably not all of them, to decide how they want to apply the principle and achieve the result. So, and between the two, the principle that we want to state and the objective that is going to be clear to everyone, the firms should be free or get space to apply them according to their structure, their capacity, there are very many things. Principles based more and examples. I'm not sure that I got your question exactly, but yes, what the board decided in December.
I think you have actually responded to that, to say that the principles and, what are some of the practices?
Yeah. So the relationship between standards and NAM, it's going to be very, very, very close. Again, I'm going to reinforce what I said. NAM is not going to be, if anything, extremely important here because it's a new space. So it's not only a matter of education, awareness raising, blah, blah, blah. To your question, Dave, of course, until the day of the certification of anything or whatever, everything is open. This is what the board decided upon the information that we collected, upon some guidance that we got even here. I remember here in these rooms hearing, remember that you are a standard setter, you are not a think tank. And that is very clear in our minds, and we received that guidance from the PIOB, from IESBA, from IFIAD, and even the firms, some of them, I think they were fine with having something, provided that it's really principles-based, that it's really high level, and it's really scalable. Now, let me just say this because I need to be absolutely clear about this. If you did not ask me, but I'm going to respond. How are the firms reacting to this, or stakeholders reacting to this project? We see a lot of uncertainty. They don't know exactly what's going to come up out of this project, and that's why we are anticipating something probably for June already, which is like a straw man about what we might want to do, so that everyone, the PIOB, the firms, and everyone can see and take a position in face of something which is more concrete. It's going to be a little bit a challenge to come up with something by that time, but we want to be early enough to give everyone that opportunity. We are having some pushback from the firms, that's clear, and with very strong voices and vocal, not probably not always the best way, but that's what's happening. And for that reason, also, we need to have clarity about the position and the vision of stakeholders, including the PIOB, about this project. We don't want to work in the silence. This is what's happening. I think that it's interesting that some of the firms and the big ones, they seem to be on board with this and very collaborative. There is some noise at other levels. So we need to have clarity about the position of all stakeholders from all groups about this project so that we can make decisions Dave, with respect to how to move forward, how much it is going to be.
Okay, I think we need to take quite a couple more questions. And Gabriela, thank you for those responses. I think whether straw man is the right first step, that's something that you need to debate. I do think it's really important for stakeholders to understand the scope, the problem statement. And I also, your comments on the firms are really important because some of them might be quite sophisticated already in this, and it's probably value proposition wise worthwhile to have those conversations with them to understand how you can take the best practices out of that. So I'm going to take 3 comments at a time and circle back to you. Let's be brief that we can get to everybody's questions and comments. I'll start there with you, Mark, Sandy, Philippe on this side, and then we'll continue.
Yes, thanks, Linda, and thanks, Gabriela. I think we've seen significant sort of scandals, whether it be exam cheating, the issues in Australia, in recent years, that I think it would actually be, it could be seen as being somewhat remiss if IESBA didn't actually look at firm culture and governance in some way. So I support the concept of you having this project, and I think it's also very important that this is a firm-wide thing, because I mean, if you look at the Australian situation, I mean that didn't come out of audit, but I recognise that there is a potential crossover between the firm culture and governance deliberations and ISQM1, which would have to be handled. But it's very important, I think, that it covers the firm as a whole. As you know, I attended the roundtable in Brussels, and Robert and Janine attended in New York and Melbourne, and I was interested to see in your slide deck the sort of preliminary sort of thoughts that came up in those roundtables, and very consistent with what I heard in Brussels. But I think one of the questions that isn't answered in here, or you don't give any sort of feedback on, is what will the output of this project be? So if you look at the current code, it says relatively little on firm culture and governance, and what it does say is a little bit fragmented. So, and I certainly heard from a number of the participants in my sort of subgroup at the roundtable that they really didn't know what direction you were taking, whether you were going to just consolidate what's currently in the code, whether you're going to consolidate and enhance what's in the code, or whether you're going to produce a sort of separate corporate governance code that sits alongside the ethics code. And I'd welcome any input or thoughts you could give us about how you see the direction of the project and what you see the output being.
Well, can I ask you to just speed it up a little bit?
Yeah. All right. I think on principles based, I agree with principles based. I think there is a tendency, though, to write things, and I think you need to be very mindful of the word count in the final document. The word count. I don't think it would serve anybody very well to have a very long document that starts off as principles based and ends up as a tome. So keep it principles based and keep it brief would be my recommendations.
Thank you, Mark. And I don't think that necessarily requires a response. I'm going to take the other questions as well. I think there are lots of things to think about, and they're probably already in your list. Sandy, thank you.
Yeah, I guess mine is more in the category of thinking about than necessarily responding to me today. Is because as I've spent the last, few months dealing with consultations related to, in the US, the audit quality indicators and the firm reporting. proposal. And the firm reporting proposal is basically a governance proposal. And it includes disclosures to the audit regulator and some to investors on the financial situation of the firm, their governance, their network, and their cyber risk. And it was roundly criticized as, you know, the audit regulator doesn't have the ability to have this information because it's not directly related to audit quality, which is ISQM1. I fear all of those things are coming back up against here. So you say you don't want to write governance standards for the purpose of governance standards, but of ethics. And ethics is about trust, and the opposite of trust is transparency, right? And these proposals were about transparency, and there was a big pushback of transparency. So the question that, or the sort of the dilemma that I face in my own mind is how, what will these actually do if there's no transparency related to these governance measures, right? How different are they than the ethics standards that may exist today? And I can probably explain this a little bit more, but I think it would be interesting for you guys to look at the consultation responses related to that, because everything was a no. Everything was a no. Everything was impossible. It wasn't scalable, was number one. I don't think that that's as important a factor as others, because I think that there are at scale, at the largest firms, that these things are where it's most important, where trust is most eroded in the profession. So I worry about always talking about scalability, because many times it's just used to not do something. And we heard that yesterday.
Yeah.
So
Okay, Sandy, please wrap it up.
yeah, I know. I'm just saying that I would look at those consultations, because I think embedded in them are all the arguments against this proposal. And I think that you have to think through those. And I think that the reality of it is that we can create governance standards, but also the last bullet on your item was transparency. And there was a lot of pushback of transparency, and all of it was a link to audit quality. So I'm just advocating that you read through some of those.
Yeah, the transparency element is important. I think that's very good advice to maybe just have a look at those responses. Philippe?
Thank you, Linda. Sorry, don't worry for the time length for me, because I have no declaration to make, just a question, simple question. I fully support, your approach, your principle-based approach, because I think that at the end of the day, in terms of culture, ethical culture, the result of that should be an ethical mindset, which allows, all the professionals to cope with, situations, unpredictable situations, and having the appropriate ethical behavior. When you deal with standards or rules, because the opposite of principle-based is rule-based, you address specific situations. And out of the specific situation, you have, a broad scope of uncertainties where people can have improper behavior if they don't have this mindset based on principles and values, ethical values, which should cover, a thinking process, in front of a new animal, to say, how am I going to address that, in line with the values and principles of my ethical frame. So my question is the following, simple. When it's about principle and values, for example, honesty, transparency, things like that, how can you articulate scalability and proportionality? Because when it's about honesty, there is no proportionality or scalability and so on. So this is my point, because in this, scalable or proportionality, that opens a window, for some improvisation regarding the ethical mindset, process of thinking and decisions.
Really good point. Thank you, Philippe. Tsecho?
Thank you. And also just following on my fellow auditors' thinking, Gabriela, is I think all of this is, we all understand the what, and perhaps the crust of the matter is in the how, and what we're going to end up delivering at the end of the day. He's talked about scalability. My thinking is around adoptability in terms of what we are seeing coming out of the comments currently. And I know we don't want to proactively judge the outcome, but what I thought we would think about is we are trying to make this a principle-based outcome at the end of the day, rather than a rule-based outcome. And I'm wondering principles of enforceability at the end of the day on the principle-based principle, because the principle-based is in the current corporate governance codes that we have, you either comply and explain, or comply or explain. And I wonder what the thinking around the design principles now, as we think around principle-based, what the end outcome will be, as the board grapples with this principle-based outcome, because it will either then say this will be enforceable or it won't, based on whether you're allowing people to explain or comply and explain outcome. So the design principles will be important to build in upfront. Thanks.
Thanks, Tsecho. Tom?
Thank you very much. One comment and one question. And as Philip said, I also would like to support your articulation and your approach. And then I think it's very important project. And one comment is that when we talk about the strategy and work plan, there is two burning platform issues. The one is this firm culture governance, and the other is the ethics of the PAVE. Scope of the ethic code, but I think it's the right way to focus on the for firm culture and governance, and then I don't think it's the right time to talk about the scope of the code itself, because this, as you said, that this is not a good moment to talk about that. So, but I feel some sort of a nervousness in their PA communities. Still, some of the IESBA may talk about the PIVE or ethics of a CFO. So this is not a good moment to talk about that. So this is my comment. And then one question is that a little bit untechnical, but as you said, that the coordination between IESBA and IESBA is really, really critical. And I understand that at the chair level and the start level, the coordination is perfect, and I think it's okay. But my question is, how do you design the board level coordination between two boards? Because I understand that IESBA is really, really interested in this in terms of the relationship with the ISQM1. So I need some sort of the more concrete design between the coordination of the board. That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm going to go to Janine and then Gabriela. I think some of these are probably pearls of wisdom at the end. They're probably one that you want to respond to now. So I'll just give you a chance to do that. Okay, thanks, Janine.
Thank you. Yes, I also support this project. I think it's important. I have you touched in your presentation also on the private equity investments that are, and you explained that it's not part of this project. On the other hand, it's not in that sense. The way I read it in the final paper that you issued in January, it's not part of not that it addresses all issues around private equity specifically, but since this is a project about ethics, it should address all kind of ethical risks, issues around resulting from all kind of structures that are out there, even from large and small firms. People have also talked about scalability, that's not actually, as some of even the smaller firms, I can think of risks, ethical risks that are even bigger in smaller firms or small offices with one dominant partner. Think about speaking up opportunities for staff in those kind of settings compared to large firms. So it's about these principles are important, but scalability in a sense that some things shouldn't apply to smaller firms. I would be very cautious with that because of some risks. Ethical risks are much higher in smaller environments. The private equity is also, like any other structure, a partner model or other structures in the audit sector are addressed through this project. But there's also the private equity alert, investment alert that you have in your work stream. And there is this CIFS and pension fund survey that in my view, in essence, also has some underlying things there in those structures that are similar to private equity investments. And my question is, so there are 3 work streams where you have parts of private equity investment issues. What is your plan to communicate, because it's a hot topic, and to the outside world on how you will address this hot topic of private equity investment, how you're currently doing that, or that you envisage maybe also something else? So that's my question, and I think I leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Janine. And Gabriela, I would suggest maybe some of them are for your list. I know between you and Ken and James, you've made copious notes, so you probably don't want to respond to all of that. The one that I think is important, and it's a nice introduction to our coordination between the 2 board sessions, is the question that Tom asked around the engagement at the board level when it comes to the link between firm culture and governance and ISQM1. So maybe let's talk about that, and then it would be useful to also hear from Tom, because we want to talk about a few other collaboration projects as well. Thanks, Gabriela.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. So we are transitioning already to the.
Unless there are 1 or 2 that you have to answer now, I don't think any of those questions were necessary to give the answer now, but those are things that we asking in our minds, and maybe something that you are working on at your board.
Take note. Where is going to be anchored concerns about scalability around the table, enforceability as well, coordination, and PI, private equity investment related issues. Okay, I'll take note, and we can discuss it. On coordination, yes, we can start by speaking about it. And I think that your question, Tom, is more about how are we putting that in practice, and how we are putting that in practice since day one. Is that probably the most important way of addressing that is that the staff, my staff, Tom's staff, are speaking all the time. They're having meetings. The 2 senior directors and the directors are speaking about this, about the plans, about what the impacts may be, what the risks can be, and etc. And Tom and I are speaking as well. We have board members, in charge of being specifically following up on some concerns or understanding the concerns on both sides. So we don't have a group, but we are working out, say, if anything, in a more agile way than having an established group, apart from these specific board members appointed for this purpose. So it's really an ongoing coordination approach. We already have a few things documented upon which the 2 boards have been reflecting. It's clear that it's still a little bit early days, and there can be some concerns about what this may be, and some uncertainty. But we hope that with this very strong ongoing coordination at staff level, at board level, at chairs level, we will avoid any kind of problems. Of course, we know that everyone is very attentive, so if there is any red flag, it will come as well. And we are very open and doing the job internally to make sure that there will be no problem in that respect. So I think that's more than that. Tom, I don't know if you
Tom,
want
you
to.
probably want to come in as well, because one of the things that we also ask ourselves, and it's not just for this, but for all the coordination projects, is there a place in some instances, and I think in some projects more than others, that you probably almost have joint board meetings to debate some of the issues collectively, because that would possibly solve, some of the slight nuances, and I'm thinking about something like pi, but maybe just your thoughts on specifically firm culture and governance versus ISQM1, and maybe Tom, you also want to add a little bit on sustainability and the adoption and implementation, how the US two boards are working together and seeing what comes out of the potential discussions you're having. Thanks.
Great. So yes, I think I'll reiterate everything Gabriela said, that both boards are 100% committed for our work to be interoperable and not to create undue friction. I think that is something that we see as an absolute in this process. We have, in addition to all the staff stuff, as Gabriela said, there's real board involvement here. Like, we've assigned effectively a board member leader to lead our interaction at the board level, and then able to raise issues. We expect, like we've had on many topics, joint board sessions. Remember, this is an approach we took quite successfully on 5,000 to make sure and sign off on the interoperability of those two standards. So yes, it's a risk, but this is something, but it's also an opportunity, if we get this right, to show a model of continued coordination and cooperation. It's on the top of our agenda. We expect, as they say, building out the straw man. My expectation is that whatever straw man is going to be built out, it will be considering the interlinkages and the complementarity of the two frameworks. So that is very much on my mind, will always be on my mind. And I think it obviously, as those things, it's a risk, but it's a risk that's being well mitigated, and there's total commitment between Gabriela and me in the process. Of course, they are developing their standards. And I think that's a general theme that Gabriela and I want to highlight and reiterate here, is that there is a lot of coordination and cooperation happening at the board levels today in a way that hadn't been done years past. But we also are aware that the more we could bring the coordination and cooperation upstream at the earliest stage of the process, sort of like as we're mapping, the better we'll be. Let's be clear, when we do project proposals, we're doing this today, but getting further board involvement and team involvement as this project approaches. And remember, with the blessing and almost with the encouragement of this group and the mine group, we were running at 150 miles per hour for the last 5 years. Now, if you talk about it, I'll talk about this in my thing, is that the contextual environment where we've now sort of getting to the phase where we're taking a little bit more time to do things, it gives a little bit more time for these coordination efforts. So I wanted just to make sure that this board understands, like, that is our mindset. We're 100% committed to it. We're talking about how we could move things up better. We're getting into another strategy work plan cycle soon enough. This one ends, like, standard setters, we have consultation. So to be ready for 27, we have to start working on it already, but making sure that we see these interconnections early on in the process, in the planning stages, I think will be helpful. Now, you asked us about 5,000, where, remember, the two boards had a success in terms of assuring interoperability on it. Many of the things that Gabriela said they're doing, we're doing the same, not coincidence. We want to have similar structures. We have an internal working group. We have an implementation contact group. We're going to be filtering issues. The implementation, our internal working groups will be coordinated with IESBA on course-cutting issues. We're developing joint guidance, FAQs where appropriate. You know, we talked about value chain with this body last year. You know, we had a little bit of a head start. Everyone, that's not a secret. So that's why we have stuff out in the marketplace already. But just the same, as we get issues in, get them rapidly, able to respond, the teams will be working together, see where there's cross-cutting issues, can respond. That being said, it's really early days to figure out what's going to come in. So if you ask me an example of where people are having implementation challenges, I can't really give you specifics
No,
yet.
it's certainly early days. And before I go to Philippe, maybe just one sort of related question. It's something that we sort of thought about, you know, and debated when we prepared for this, and that is whether and when and how your two boards collectively are sitting back and just regrouping on how suddenly the world has shifted on sustainability reporting, you know, because of external factors, policy makers, politicians, and so on. It was a little bit of a 180-degree turn when it comes to that. And what is and maybe that's also early days, and maybe things need to settle down a little bit of what's happening in Europe with the omnibus standard and, you know, what's happening in the US, but just how your plans are to consider this and consider the impact when it comes to your focus on sustainability. And maybe that's not something you want to respond to now, but just something that's on our mind, certainly.
Well, it's definitely on our minds. Philippe attended our board meeting. We actually had an hour session on this exact topic, an executive, because it's a strategy related idea. Our current path, though, remember, regardless, there are jurisdictions adopting our standard. We continue to stand behind our standard 5,000. We think the best thing we could do is for those jurisdictions to continue to support the adoption and implementation through useful guidance and support. It may affect the way our public positioning on some matters. I think we should give due consideration on that. But again, we stand behind our standard. I'm sure Gabriela would say the same, that it was developed through robust due process with significant commitments to guidance support, and they're there for use. The timetables of when they're adopted may be impacted by this, but there are many jurisdictions around the world adopting them. And remember, people are using 3,000 today, and the reason we did 5,000 was that we were told that 3,000 doesn't provide sufficient guidance for the specificities of sustainability reporting standards.
And there's certainly many corporates that we are mostly on a voluntary basis that are doing it. I'm going to go to Philippe and Christelle, and then I'm going to circle back. Yes, Gabriela, do you want to?
Some very quickly. I will make Tom's words my own. It's exactly the same approach. We also had a board reflection on all these, but there is something, our standards are framework neutral, and the beauty of this is that they adapt to the frameworks as they change. It can be less, it can be more, but you still have the independence rules and the audit rules for the framework to which they apply.
It might certainly influence a little bit whether you get comments, who are people, corporates willing to give comments, you know, with adoption and implementation, but I think time will tell when it comes to that.
Linda, if I may, I just wanted to put this on the record because as a public session, you've asked a very strategic question, very important question. We, of course, will be engaging with our stakeholder advisory group. It's precisely the type of topic in terms of navigating the environment and the advice they would have, and that will be up on our upcoming SAC meeting.
Very good point. Yeah, and I think it would be worthwhile, and maybe we'll also talk to Alan in your preparation, that it's worthwhile to maybe get some views from some of those SAC members.
It's very explicitly addressed. It's
okay, Philippe, and then Dave. Oh, Philippe is okay. Thank you, Dave. You also okay, or was you?
No,
okay.
Suggestion. So, but Philippe didn't. I'm not stepping on your toes here, Philippe. Okay, great. Thanks for all of that. This is kind of a specific suggestion to consider with respect to the staff alert on private equity investment in firms. I know, Gabriela, it's being done by the IESBA staff, But I do believe that there are aspects of private equity investment in firms that could be addressed through ISQM1, through the risk assessment process, identifying new risks that may exist as a result of private equity investment and the risk response or controls that are put in place. And so I just question whether this ought to be a joint project, because there will be aspects, if all we do is talk about independence and the independence intricities of this, I think that can be helpful, but I think there are broader implications on IESB standards that firms ought to consider as they take on these investments. So just a suggestion. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I think the other two that we spoke about as we prepared, where you potentially want to consider if it's necessary for a joint project or a very closely aligned project, might be technology. I mean, there's lots of things in the technology space, and also PI in the longer term, because clearly the PI definition, and Tom, you spoke about how there's a lot of collaboration now. That world has shifted, and that principle or the practice has shifted, and there is now a lot of collaboration between the two boards. But the PI definition is probably the poster child of what happens if there's not upfront collaboration, because there are often unintended consequences. But maybe something to think about. So I'm going to go to Janine, and I'm going to give the last word to you before we break for coffee.
Thanks, Linda. Yes, in relation to the discussion that we just had, I was thinking about the adoption and implementation working group. That is to get information on implementation issues, which is, of course, the monitoring part. But do you have ideas already how that will, in terms of process and maybe accelerated process, be turned into a sort of rapid response mechanism when there are implementation issues that require a quicker response from the standard setting boards in terms of smooth implementation of the standards on sustainability. And the other thing was that I just forgot on the private equity investment alert. On your slides, I read there form over substance. And I can remember during the IESBA meeting that I observed, I actually made a different observation that the alert should address the substance over form. So if you look at the private equity investments, and Dave is talking about risks that are broader than only independence issues, which is correct. But it's also about what kind of structure is there, and there are different structures in practice in these private equity investments. And if you look at the things that are currently in the code, but that's mostly, I think, from the independence is a big part of that. You need to not only look at what's on paper, the way they structured it, but how it's the substances of the structure. And that was, I think, that's more important, that in the alert, there is also some reflection that when it comes to auditor independence considerations, that they look at how it works in practice. And that's sometimes different than what's legally on in terms of the structure in writing. So for me, it's more substance that you look at the real situation over the formality, what they put in writing.
Okay, Gabriela, I'm going to hand back to you for any final comments, responses, and before we wrap up, and if there's anything from Tom.
Well, I think it's more thanking for all these comments, reiterate our commitment, speaking about coordination, our full commitment to keep on deepening our coordination. I heard about some possible joint projects that I think that this takes a lot of reflection, because I'm not saying that there is no room for this, but for instance, on technology, I'll need more information about what's in your mind about a possible joint project, since the IESBA has already developed standards and NAM and etc. It's not that we cannot update, and we should, but some questions here, but of course, always open to receive good proposals. And finally, yes, I didn't say, but I take note of still on firm culture and governance, which is top of mind for us now. Take note of all the good comments that we received, but also the broad support that I could read in your interventions, which is important, not only for the support, but again, because we need to have clarity about where the stakeholders stand in respect to this project, so that we can listen to everyone and make the best out of it. That's it. Thank you.
I got the only other thing to add, Janine, is our working group, internal working group, we're going through issues monthly right now. There's a monthly filtering process with the board members and the staff team to review what's coming in and what we're hearing in the marketplace. I think we could set up guidance and do guidance quite quickly if needed. We also don't exclude the possibility that there actually could be standard setting if there's a need for a surgical strike. We stated something clearly in paragraph 8-276. I don't know what 8-276 is offhand, but I'm just meaning, there are different ways we could do things, and we're ready to move quickly. And once we put up the implementation group, contact group of actual practitioners, we'll actually be hearing things even more quickly. So numbers, things in place. On the technology side, just to be clear, we will need to understand the ethical implications of anything we do. Set it up, let's not go to org structure and the organizational approach for addressing it, but that is clearly upfront as we do information gathering on any quality management component. And that's really where the rubber may hit the road in terms of our technology work.
And thanks for that. The comment on let's call it the rapid response as well when it comes to sustainability is really important. It is a comment that we made when we certified, but it was also a question that we got from the investor community when we engaged with them yesterday. Will there be that that mechanism if needed? So thank you very much. We're going to break for coffee. Can we all return at 12:25? Because we're going to go back into another public session with the IESBA and Tom. Thank you.